They built their empires on steel and blood. She built hers on a whisper, a promise, and the terrifying fragility of a man's heart. And for centuries I have watched from the shadows, not merely reading the scrolls of chroniclers, but discerning the unspoken, the glances, the subtle shifts in the air that truly dictate the fall of a vizier or the rise of a concubine. From my vantage behind this very pillar, I've seen the true architecture of ambition, the silent language of a gaze, the tremor of a hand that betrays more than any decree. He was the Sultan, a titan bestriding the known world, his word law, his gaze a death sentence. Yet even titans, especially those burdened by a dynasty's weight, yearn for more than fear. They crave understanding, a mirror to their profound solitude. The women of the harem, countless and exquisite, offered beauty, fleeting pleasure, the crucial promise of heirs to secure the bloodline. But she offered something else entirely, a sanctuary for his tormented mind, a quiet, unassuming port amidst the brutal storms of his own making, far from the constant threat of betrayal that stalked every corner of his palace. It began subtly, as all truly insidious manipulations do. A tremor in her voice, a flicker of fear in her eyes, quickly masked when he first summoned her to his chambers. Not the practiced coquetry of the others, eager to please, but a raw, almost childlike vulnerability that disarmed him completely. He, who was accustomed to elaborate masks and calculated performances, found hers felt terrifyingly real. A dropped silk handkerchief, not clumsily, but with a calculated grace that drew his eye, then her own slender hand, reaching, brushing his fingers with an electric current that spoke volumes in its silence. It was a fleeting contact, yet it lingered, a forbidden spark in the sterile air of power. He saw the faces of advisors, loyal only to their own coffers, their own bloodline. He saw the sharp, hungry glint in the eyes of rivals, sharpening their blades in the shadows of the dynasty, waiting for any sign of weakness. He carried the crushing weight of 1,000 decisions, each steeped in potential poison, each capable of unraveling his empire. And then he saw her, not as a mere concubine, a fleeting conquest, but as an unexpected confidant. A shared secret, a murmured observation about the court's treachery, delivered with a gaze that held no judgment, only a profound, almost dangerous empathy. She didn't flatter his immense power. She acknowledged profoundly his isolating burden. That was the seed, the silent cultivation. While others vied for his bed, for the transient warmth of his body, she aimed for his mind, for the cold, lonely chambers of his heart. A warm glance, not burning with overt desire, but radiating a calm solace, a promise of peace that no other woman in his gilded cage could offer. He felt seen, truly seen, not as the formidable sultan, but as the man beneath the crown, burdened and agonizingly alone. And in that recognition, in that terrifying intimacy, lay the first, almost imperceptible link of his chains. She wasn't building an empire with steel and blood, but with the delicate yet unbreakable threads of his own deep-seated loneliness, weaving them into an indissoluble bond. This was the forbidden prelude, the silent, insidious rise of a love that would not merely warm a throne, but would ultimately consume the very essence of the dynasty. The game had begun, not with a roar of battle, but with a single potent whisper, and the world, as he knew it, would never be the same. Behind these gilded pillars, one learns the language of shadows. Not the fleeting ones cast by torchlight, but the deep, abiding darkness within the human heart. And it was there, in that sacred, brutal chamber of power, that she began her true work. Not with a dagger, nor with open defiance, but with a whisper, a touch, a glance that promised understanding. She understood, you see, that a sultan, for all his might, is but a man burdened by a dynasty's weight, haunted by the spectre of a bloodline he must protect, yet also from which threats often bloom. Others brought him petitions, flatteries, the cold calculus of alliances, each offering their fealty, their counsel, their daughters, all for a price. She brought him stillness, a rare commodity in a court that perpetually thrummed with ambition. Observe, if you will, the delicate dance. The shared cup of sherbet, sweetened not just with honey, but with the quiet understanding that passed between them, a silent covenant forged in moments of profound intimacy. A glance, held a fraction too long, that acknowledged his unspoken weariness, the solitude of his exalted position. A hand, cool and steady, brushing a bead of sweat from his brow during a fevered night. A simple gesture, yet one that spoke of absolute devotion, of a presence so vital it banished the phantoms of his solitude, making her indispensable even to his very breath. This was no mere affection, this was architecture. Meticulous, unforgiving. She did not merely love him, she studied him. Every tremor in his voice, every flicker in his eyes, every unsaid frustration became a note in a symphony only she could conduct. She saw the man beneath the heavy robes, the boy beneath the daunting crown, and offered him refuge. A sanctuary from the endless machinations, the betrayals that festered even among his closest kin, poisoning the very air he breathed. He spoke to her of his fears, the whispers of rebellion, the cunning of rival viziers, the relentless pressure of securing the succession, the burden of decisions that stained his hands with unseen blood. And she listened, truly listened. Not to judge, not to advise with political ambition, but to absorb, to reflect, to offer the solace of a heart that seemed, to him, utterly untainted by the court's venom. She became the mirror in which he saw not just the Sultan, the formidable ruler, but the man he wished to be, strong yet capable of tenderness, feared yet profoundly loved. Do you understand the weight of such trust? The profound, almost pathological dependency she fostered? When the empire's storms raged, when the council chambers echoed with discord, and the scent of poison seemed to linger in the air, he would seek her out. Not for a decree, not for a solution, but for a quiet moment in the private apartments, where the heavy silk hangings muted the world's harsh clamour, where time itself seemed to bend to their will. There, in that claustrophobic intimacy, woven from shared secrets and whispered confessions, he found his anchor. His indispensable confidant. His sole refuge from the brutal realities of power, the silent assassins lurking in every shadow. She did not offer grand solutions, but the quiet strength to face them. She did not praise his power, but affirmed his humanity, his doubts, his very soul. And in doing so, she became more potent than any political alliance, more secure than any fortress wall. For what is a fortress against the siege of the soul, against the erosion of solitude? The weapon, you see, was never a physical blade, nor a vial of poison. It was the silken thread she wove around his heart, so fine, so imperceptible, that he felt not restraint, but liberation. Each shared secret, each moment of unguarded vulnerability he revealed, became a knot tightening the bond, binding his spirit to hers. It was a gilded cage, built not of iron bars, but of his own desperate need for understanding, for peace, for a love that felt utterly, tragically his own. And as the cage closed, softly, irrevocably, her weapon was sharpened, honed to a terrifying precision. The game of queens, my dears, is played not on battlefields, but in the silent, treacherous chambers of the heart. And she, in her delicate, iron hands, now held the key to his very will. Observe closely now, for here, love sheds its gentle skin, revealing the scales beneath. The weapon, once forged for survival, was sharpened, honed to a razor's edge. It was no longer merely a shield for her own heart, but a blade poised against the throats of those who dared stand in the path of her bloodline, her dynasty. The Sultan, caught in the intricate web of her affection, saw not the meticulous design but only the devotion of his beloved. He saw a woman whose loyalty knew no bounds, whose every counsel, every whispered concern was for his well-being, for the stability of his reign. He would never suspect the subtle poison that dripped, not into his chalice, but into his very perception of the world. A broken seal, so slight, so easily dismissed. A parchment meant for the Grand Vizier's eyes alone would find itself handled, its wax tampered with, leaving a ghost of suspicion. Was it an enemy within the palace walls, or perhaps the vizier himself seeking correspondence beyond the Sultan's knowledge? She would never touch such a thing directly, no, but a maid, beholden to her, might find a moment of opportune clumsiness. A fleeting glance, a barely perceptible tilt of the head in the Sultan's presence, as if to say, "My lord, I saw nothing," and the seed of doubt, so small, would be planted. It would burrow deep, festering in the quiet chambers of the Sultan's mind. A whispered remark, seemingly innocent, delivered under the cloak of shared intimacy. "My lion," she might murmur, stroking his brow as he rested. "I worry for our children. The Pasha of Anatolia, his wealth grows. His armies, they speak of his generosity more than your own." Not an accusation, never. Only a concern, born of love. But in a court where ambition was a viper, such words were venom. They questioned loyalty, painted a picture of a rival too strong, too popular, too dangerous. Then, the strategic timing. A favored concubine, perhaps, whose beauty had caught the Sultan's eye, whose belly swelled with potential rivalry. A sudden illness, not fatal but debilitating enough to send her to the palace infirmary, away from the Sultan's bed, away from his thoughts. Or a change in a decree issued by the Sultan himself, coincidentally stripping a powerful Aga of his lands, just days after she had subtly alluded to his disloyalty, his lack of respect for the throne. Nobody could connect these dots, nobody dared to. The downfalls were swift, yet silent. A disgraced vizier, banished to the furthest reaches of the empire. A pasha recalled, his loyalty questioned, his influence diminished. A concubine, her child stillborn, her beauty faded, relegated to the shadows of the harem. Each dismissal, each tragic turn of fate, was orchestrated without a single direct command from her lips. She merely illuminated the path for the Sultan, guiding his gaze towards the threats she had so carefully constructed. This was the quiet power of her venomous affection. The gilded cage of the palace shimmered, but beneath its beauty, the shadows lengthened. The silence that followed these eliminations was not one of peace, but of rising dread. For those who remained, the message was clear. In this brutal game of queens and kings, the greatest weapon was not steel, but the unseen threads of love, manipulated with ruthless efficiency, ensuring her bloodline's ascent, one whisper, one broken seal, one tragic accident at a time. Do you not feel the chill in the air, even now, the echoes of their quiet falls? The Sultan in his chambers believed he ruled alone, his word law, his decree absolute. Yet even absolute power casts a shadow, and in that shadow, a woman moved with the grace of a predator in silk. She did not raise her voice in the divan, nor did she stand before the legions. Her battlefield was far more intimate, the Sultan's mind, his heart, the very air he breathed. Do you imagine her merely whispering names? No. It was a slow, deliberate poisoning of trust against one, a subtle sweetening of the ear for another, a question posed at dawn, a dream recounted at dusk. My lord, does not Vizier Ahmed seem weary? His eyes lack the fire your empire demands. A seed planted. Days later, a different name would drift into conversation, seemingly by chance. This young Mehmet, they say he served your father with distinction, a man of quiet loyalty, perhaps? And so, the Grand Vizierate, the very pillar of the realm, would shift. Not by decree, but by desire. A desire she had meticulously, invisibly, woven into the Sultan's own. But her ambition, like a creeping vine, sought to embrace the very foundations of the dynasty. Marriages, once instruments of alliance and bloodline purity, became tools in her hand. A princess betrothed to a distant bey, bolstering a border, yes, but also weakening a rival faction at court. A young prince, her own son perhaps, married into a family whose loyalty was absolute, whose power she could wield. The tapestry of the empire, woven over centuries by men, was now being subtly restitched by her, thread by silent thread, from the confines of the harem. The whispers that shaped viziers now charted the course of nations. Alliances shifted, not by the clamour of war drums, but by the quiet counsel given in the Sultan's private moments. A subtle suggestion, a shared concern, a look of profound wisdom in her eyes. The Sultan, convinced of his divine mandate, saw only his own magnificent will. He never saw the hand that guided it, a hand clad in the finest silk, yet strong enough to shake the very foundations of his world. A silent command, echoing through the corridors of power, rearranging the pieces on a chessboard few even knew existed. Is that not the greatest weapon of all, to rule without ever being seen to rule? The silence fell, a heavy velvet shroud drawn over the palace, colder than any winter wind. She was gone. Her breath, once a gale that shaped empires, now still. And in that stillness, her bloodline remained, firm, defiant, etched onto the very throne she had seized with such audacious grace. A victory, perhaps, in the grand, ruthless game of queens. But look, if you dare, beyond the gleaming crown, past the triumphs whispered in hushed tones. What echoes lingered in the chambers she left behind? The scent of metaphorical poison, not of the body but of the soul, permeated the air. A phantom whisper of her methods. Was it truly a win to live cloaked in constant vigilance, where every touch of silk might conceal betrayal, every loving glance a potential shadow of deceit? The burden of such power, the unending watch, the profound solitude of one who dared trust no one, what did it truly cost her soul? Her dynasty stood, yes, an enduring edifice built brick by brick with calculated affection and unyielding will. Yet the price paid. The ultimate psychological cost of wielding love as a weapon. Did she ever know true peace? Or was her heart, in its final beat, a solitary fortress, trust itself a forgotten language, her only companion the cold gleam of the crown? The gilded cage of her power, perhaps, became her own gilded prison. A melancholic reflection upon a life spent on the precipice. See her now, in the faded portrait that hangs in the quiet corridor. Her eyes, still piercing, betray nothing of the 1,000 untold struggles hidden beneath the paint. Was she a monstrous architect of fate, a magnificent survivor against impossible odds, or a tragic figure forever bound by the choices she made, forever alone on a peak of her own creation? Her methods, a chilling precedent, forever altered the rules of engagement. The whispers of her cunning still echo through these halls, a warning, a guide, a dark and prestigious legacy for those who dared to play the game of queens.